Good morning. Welcome to the lecture on Sophocles' Oedipus the King, original title Oedipus Tyrannos. And in this world, the world of Athens now, we will see how the Greek consciousness, the Greek understanding of human life has developed. But within the Homeric framework, which I tried to introduce you to a couple of lectures ago in your first lecture on the Odyssey, and to see how they took this Homeric beginnings, the Homeric vision of what human life is all about in some of its main aspects, and how they developed it. And mainly, the first sheet, the first page of the sheets I give you, indicate what I can hope to achieve in preparing you for the reading of this great work, and beyond it, hopefully to understand something of what is meant by the term tragic, how it has been used all through the centuries. The word tragic can mean many things. Some of you may think it's tragic if you get a low grade in something. You may think it's tragic if your boyfriend or girlfriend ditches you. You may think it's tragic more seriously when in the game of nations a few or small groups are deciding the fate of all of humanity as they carve up the geography of the world and enjoy themselves, probably with violins and a tear glass, if ever you see the movie of Nero and Rome. So the first page, therefore, the main items there are under conceptual framework, meaning if you can get your intellectual minds around cosmos, polis, and the god Apollo, what these three terms represent, as I will try to expand on them, I think you will be in a better position to read this particular play from this particular point of view that I am presenting it this time, which also indicates to you that great works are great because they inspire people to come to all kinds of interpretations and understandings based on the same text. So my justification for the interpretation I will be giving you is that I think that if I understand what's meant by Homer's cosmos, what is meant by the polis of the Athenian world, of the Periclean Athens, and what they understood by the symbol of the god Apollo, as I've tried to understand these more and more deeply over the years, I think I've understood better and better what I think Sophocles was trying to do in this particular work of Oedipus the King, the man who was fated to kill his father and marry his mother. And so sometimes it has been called a play about fate. And this is one of the things I will be trying to tell you today, that beware of words like fate. They're very loaded. They can have very different meanings: fate, destiny, moiri, the shares, now in the Greek world much better, but qada qadar when you come to other, some of the monotheistic understandings, predestination with Calvin. These terms are very, very rich terms, and very complex terms. Don't think that you understand them easily and simply, or necessarily that anybody talking to you about them understands them. They're very rich because they're everything that we're really interested in, speaking about our human life. And our human life is very, very complex, and we try to give it meaning and bring it under control by creating systems, by creating concepts and ways of expressing it. That's what you're coming into as you come into CVSP in 205. The whole of the program is really 201, 202, 203, 204, if ever you want to take a look at what you would have been taking had you been forced to take those. The whole project of this program was to get you all introduced into this human effort at the university. When you're doing specialized works and developing your skills in specialized ways, very important, but at the same time to focus on your humanity and your humanization. The goal of life is to become more and more human. You become so insofar as you become more and more aware of what it is you are doing, reflect on it, be able to express it, see how others are reflecting on the same things and expressing it, being in proper and open and respectful dialogue with others, recognizing the other is yourself and yourself is an other in one sense, that you don't, no human is an island unto himself, as somebody called Donne once said. These are things that I'm trying to help you with now, particularly in this lecture. to deal with Sophocles' Oedipus the King, not as a great work of tragedy and theater or literature, whatever, but rather as something in CVSP, in the study of civilizations, in the study of how human beings have always reflected upon their existence and attempted to give meaning to it. So Homer gave meaning to the gods, if you remember, in the lecture on Homer that I gave a couple of weeks ago. He took the many gods and goddesses and divine beings of the popular understanding that the peoples had them and gave them an artistic unity, gave them an expression, gave artistic meaning to them by putting them all together in his cosmos. So that first item there, Homer's cosmos, is to help you remember what we tried to tell you in the 2 lectures ago. Basically, he claimed and taught and inspired the Greeks who came after him to think very important thoughts. These are quite important when we're trying to understand life and the meaning of life. So, we're not living in a random universe. We're not living where things just happen. You never know what is happening really, but that really there is a structure, there is a given order, there is a beauty to this universe that we're living in, and we need to now explore it. And Homer tried to explore it poetically, and through his 2 great works, they inspired the Greeks after Homer to go into history with Herodotus and Thucydides, into legal works, all kinds of laws that came up, but also were inspired by this Homeric view, into philosophy, of course, and into many other fields, into drama now with this work. This is the great importance of Homer as the inspirer of this Hellenic culture, and influenced later on the Hellenistic, the Roman, and all who were influenced by this group of thinking in the monotheistic world after them. So basically, then I would like to try to remind you that this work is within this context. Before I go any further, let me just give you a little bit of the context under those arrows at the top. The origins of drama, tragedy, the 3 great tragedians, democracy, a very important point now to keep in mind as you read this text, and theater itself and the way this play was presented. Okay, we have the 3 great gods of that Homer said, everything was divided amongst the 3 of these. If you will remember, they're the 3 great gods. Athene, the goddess of wisdom, which was very important in Homer. Aphrodite, Helen, of Troy and all that. That's a picture of me if you've forgotten. Herodotus and Thucydides were the historians who took Homer now into the Homeric vision of the universe and expressed it now and focused more on how do you write history, or how do you present history, how do you interpret history. So this is the so-called golden age of Pericles. Pericles was this great leader whom they came to see as a symbol of the combination of power and wisdom. Political power is usually on its own and usually just for power. Wisdom is usually on its own and doesn't get involved or applied much in society. Pericles came to mean, after this period, had a symbolic meaning of a great leader who, with Plato, you will see this is one of the things that inspire his notion of you need a philosopher, a king, to rule if you want ever justice and beauty in society. So this is the period we're in, roughly the sort of 5th century before Christ, inspired philosophy for 400 years even before Socrates, but Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, you'll be somewhat introduced to them, I think, in 205. Thucydides in history in 201, you don't get it in 205. And Sophocles, the man we're dealing with now. So these people were more or less contemporaries in the same cultural period, the same intellectual period, all of them being inspired in one way or another by the great Homeric view of the cosmos. How so? Well, very quickly and very simply, as much as I can put it, basically with both Thucydides and Socrates and Sophocles, the same view that we have to interpret what's happening. And now you have to interpret what's happening to Sophocles' Oedipus, if you want to, within this particular view, that this is the world we're living in. This is how the world functions, according to the way this cosmos functions, not according to some other human way you may think it should be functioning, but it functions in a given way, in an impersonal way, in a way that I'll go into a little bit more fully later. But each one of them takes it into Socrates into the field of rationalistic philosophy, inspiring Plato and Aristotle and others to say that, if we really understand the cosmos, we will see it's ultimately rational and it's ultimately good, and it's a very optimistic and hopeful view, from basing primarily on the sort of figure of Odysseus, who represented this the inquisitive mind, the search for truth and for facts and for scientific knowledge and for the truth of his own identity. He must come home, because home means where he truly belongs as a human identity. So from the Odysseus aspect of the Odyssey, you get from Homer developing what you will see in philosophy through Socrates and Plato coming. With Sophocles, however, you have more of a sort of a development and a continuation of what we had in Homer's, the tragic aspects of Homer. Homer's works were epics, not a tragedy. Now you have a tragedy. So a form of literature, a genre of literature has developed that takes the tragic aspect rather than the rationalistic aspect. So you may want to think of them as two aspects in Homer, a tragic aspect and a rationalistic aspect. In Homer's corpus, the rationalistic will go into philosophy that you'll see with Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. The tragic element, which is more predominant really even in the Odyssey, because in order to be a hero, he had to disclose his identity, and this causes him all this kind of punishment. But if he didn't, he'd be a nobody, and so he didn't have a happy choice. There was no win-win. He had to lose one way or another. So the tragic element, Achilles in Hades, the one who supposedly got all the glory that the Homeric code would tell you by being a hero, choosing to die young and be a somebody, being a hero rather than to live long and be a nobody. Here, when he interviews him, and Odysseus would thinking rationalistically that, of course, you must be the greatest man here. What is he told? He's told, I regret it. I wish I was just still alive. So, these are tragic elements. And then the tragic element at the end of the Odyssey, when Homer cannot end his story, because he has Odysseus say, we need to prepare now for another epic, in fact, because according to the mechanism of revenge by taking justice for yourself, basically it's a never-ending vicious cycle. So he brings in, very, very intelligently, Zeus and Athene for what they symbolize, but from outside of the mechanism of the story, because he cannot end it. And that's a tragic note also, that if your system of government and the system of justice is so dependent upon personal revenge, you're never going to have peace. It's just going to be one war after another, one epic after another. So the tragic element from Homer is what we're going to be focusing on today in Sophocles. And if I can give you some basic sort of handles on that, your teachers can do the rest with the details that I won't have time for. And I've written out the whole thing here, so if you ever wish to read something and see an argument with textual reference, that's why I'm giving you all this. I will certainly never try to cover all this in this one lecture. I think back to the days when we had more lectures, but you prefer having less lectures, so we have to pack a lot of stuff into one. Okay, Prometheus, the icon of tragedy, the figure who had to get for humans to have fire. It's not the gods who are going to give us fire. For whatever reason, they had decided not to give fire to humanity. Imagine humanity without fire. Well, Prometheus is this legendary figure who risks his happiness, his life, by stealing fire from the gods and giving it to mankind. So man is the benefactor of humanity in this tragic understanding. He becomes an icon for all of tragedy because he has to pay the price by having his liver pecked out by an eagle every single day, and then the next morning it's restored and the eagle comes back and pecks away at it again as the price, the tragic price he has to pay to benefit mankind. Aeschylus and Euripides, as well as Sophocles, and their names are all on your sheet, are the three great names in tragedy, because the Greeks were the first to formulate what we use in the West and in the global world today as theater, not the no theater of Japan and great theater in other places, but rather this is the sort of the theatrical tradition of tragedy and comedy and things that come out of it. The great name in comedy is Aristophanes, and this is in the clouds here. He was making fun of Socrates, having them give him a four-gun salute or whatever. If you can see the picture clearly, you'll understand. So Athens and democracy, the Parthenon, the temple to Athene, up and high on the hill before it gets destroyed by somebody who thinks it's sacrilegious. Go and visit it. Apollo is the main god here in this particular work. and Apollo comes to represent light and rationality and music and things like this. In this particular work, he's the major god that gives you knowledge of what's happening. If you want to know what's happening and why things are happening and what's going to happen, Apollo became the major god with his center at Delphi. I'll talk about that a little bit in another slide. Dionysus is the other great god of tragedy. All the plays were done for not up in the hill, the temple of worship to Athena, but rather down in the marketplace in honor of the god Dionysus, who represented Athena, of course, represented wisdom and things like that. He represented frenzy and vitality and and energy. So this is some pictures of that. A typical theater to show you how theater was very dynamic and very interactive in those days, where you go to a theater. I went to see the Vanessa Redgrave event here at AUB, if any of you did, and I was sitting back in Sam Faris Hall there, or even here. Why don't we just take the example here? Those of you sitting there in the back, there's very little way I can interact with you. Or if there were actors up here doing a play, you'd be a spectator. Whereas here, because of the way they were presented relative to the actors down there in what was called the orchestra, or the dancing place, it was a very vital event, theater, in those days, and it was very vital as an art. Theater is the most active of the arts, perhaps, because a great play is successful in production depending upon the audience as much as the actors, really. When an audience doesn't react properly to a play, the play is horrible. When the audience is reacting properly the way they ought to, they're not laughing in a tragedy or not crying or missing the jokes in the comic, the audience helps create the work. But anyway, this is just to make some comments about theater and go into theater for much more interest. But this is also a personal comment. We waited for a theater here at AUB, and then we got this auditorium, which is good for music and for other things, but this is not a theater. Gulbenkian Theater up at the LAU is a very good example of something modeled on this Greek work. And in the last 40 years of the 20th century, nobody built a theater like this as a theater. Everybody started to build theaters along the model of this, because it's interactive. It was much more vital and dynamic and interesting when you have this kind of audience actor interaction. When you read the play and you read the chorus particularly, don't think of it just as poetry. Try to imagine it coming to life through music and art and dancing and costumes. So tragedy was a very exciting event. This is just some examples of things. The one down at the bottom is similar to one we did here at Oedipus. We used that, a similar kind of a thing. I hadn't seen that. They probably had seen mine. They cribbed from me. But these plays are very dynamic plays. What you want to get out of this, now to flip back to your fly sheet, is primarily that the chorus is with masks and ceremonial costumes and music and dance and poetry, something that inspired in the 20th century what came to be called total theater, which you should be understanding very easily now with multimedia. There's so many ways now of bringing different media into what you're doing. For you to do the sort of play they did in the first half of the 20th century, it was very, very boring, where you just have actors up here and you're all there and you're watching and they're pretending like they can't see you or something. You get back into a much more interactive kind of mode of where the actors can actually even address the audience and bring them into things. So total theater was very much inspired by the way the Greeks did theater. Coming now to the three main items of Cosmos, Polis, and Apollo. Cosmos I've gone into in that first lecture, but just to remind you of the points you want to remember: the centrality of beauty in this world. Okay, the centrality of faith in monotheism. All right, you prove your humanity by how faithful you can be to another human being. All right, here you prove your humanity more by how much you can respect beauty and encourage beauty and garner beauty in everything, in your relationships and everything you do in life. This is, beauty became a central aspect of everything that the Greeks inspired, that Homer inspired, because, and I give you that quotation from the Odyssey, which, where Homer has Odysseus say, why evil? Why so much misery? Why so much wars? For the sake of the singing of people thereafter. And of course, it's not just that line, the whole of the Homeric atmosphere is this. We're living in and I'm not going to go back over the things, go back over the sheets that I gave you for the lecture 2 times ago. But the main points, it's for understanding this particular text. The world is impersonal. So when you're reading what happens to Oedipus, that he kills his father and marries his mother, hopefully when you see he didn't want to kill his father, didn't want to marry his mother, he tried to do everything that a moral and a rational human being might try to do. If he hears he has to kill his father and marry his mother, he tries to do everything he can do to get away from it, all right? But the world does not help him. All right, he goes to Apollo to try to get help, and Apollo scorns him and doesn't give him what he wants and doesn't tell him what's happening. No help from the divine, no help from anything other than that. Because the world you're living in is not made for you. So don't expect help. Don't expect something from the outside, either from a god or even from anything outside of yourself. The world is not made to function like that. It's simply impersonal. It's just there. It's a structure. It's beautiful. It's the way it is. It's all allotted out. You know, Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, Athene. Each thing has its own place, its own share, its own hudud, its own limitations. All right? That's the way the world is. Was it made for you and me? Why should you think it's made for me and me? We're just one thing in this cosmos. And this is a great problem for Oedipus, because Oedipus functions as many of us tend to function, naively perhaps, or if that is, it may be true, and Oedipus, and this wasn't the case that the Greeks knew. When we function thinking things are going to work for us, if we do the right thing, we're going to get rewarded. If we use our minds in the best possible way, we'll get a proper thing. What this story is trying to tell you, or what this work is trying to tell you, is don't expect that in life. If it happens, fine. Fight for it, work for it. Do that as a human being the same way Oedipus tried to do. But unlike Oedipus, don't be surprised when you realize that as a human, the world isn't made to help you get fulfillment, okay? So what's the world made for? Well, it's made for itself, for cosmic order, cosmic beauty, that everything stays and remains where it should. No one tips the balance. Zeus never goes against the order of things. When in the Iliad, he's about to help somebody, because the gods were fighting on both sides of the Trojan War. One of the gods, sometimes Athene, some will come and tell him, you can't do that. That's not the way the order has been set. Homer never allows even Zeus to go against the given order. So Zeus, including like all the others, is limited. So the notion of limitation is very, very important. It's this beauty of the universe that the universe works for, to maintain its order, to maintain its beauty, its place. And then there's this second. Now when we come to the human, well, what's the human made for? Well, the human is made to primarily be aware of the polis. So the polis has become a very important human and philosophical concept now. The polis simply meant the city-state, autonomous city-states, as the Greek world was before they became Greece as a nation-state. But even in this period, in other words, they're not yet Greece. There's just the Hellenic peoples, the Argives, the Danaan. But what united them, of course, was Homer, conceptually, in terms of mind and what they think, the way they think, and the Greek language. That's all. But basically then, what should the human work for? But always not expecting reward. That's the tragic element. Don't live for reward. Don't do the right thing because you want to be rewarded. Do the right thing, just for its own sake. And why? Well, because number one, it will give you the name. You'll be a somebody. All right? Odysseus didn't worry about whether he was going to be punished by Poseidon or not. He wanted to do the only thing for him that had value. He told him his name, and he told him his address, and his Facebook, and all that. So because that's the only way he could be a somebody. So be a somebody. Don't come into life and leave it sort of having done nothing, just being a mediocre slob, but do something that'll make of you some sort of a somebody, whatever your context is. But live primarily also for the polis, because the polis meant humanity. The only context for humanity, and for yourself as well. You cannot be a human outside of the polis. Now, what did the polis come to mean? The polis come to mean a society of a relatively small community. Aristotle later defined it as not less than 10,000 and not more than 100,000. A relatively small community where all the free citizens would take active part in everything that was happening. So Sophocles was a general in the army of Pericles. He was a great poet and wrote great poetry, all right? But he was also a priest of the god Apollo. This was kind of the situation. Be a full part of the polis. Take part in everything. Be concerned for the polis. And I'm hoping that when you read this particular play, you will let Sophocles speak for himself and follow how much he focuses on the polis and how much he focuses on Oedipus as someone who's focusing on helping the polis. And how Tiresias, the so-called prophet, and you need to understand that word means many things in different cultures. It can just be a fortune teller, it can just be a Maggie Farah, Michelle Hayek, somebody who comes up on New Year's Eve. So the word prophet, you need to understand precisely what it means in each culture. It can mean a different thing. In this, the way Sophocles presents Tiresias is someone who has power. He has cosmic power. He can see things that others can't see. But he doesn't care about the polis because he's living outside of the polis. If you don't live in a well-functioning polis, you can't be a full human being. And that's what I want to be. I want to be a full human being. Remember, this was Odysseus refusing immortality. He doesn't want the immortality of the easy-living gods. He wants to be home where he belongs as a full human being. So the polis then is not just the city-state, but it's the necessary condition for you and me and for any human, for them, to live a truly full-blown human life. And democracy now, this was one of the first experiments in democracy that we can, we have things about that we can think about. It was not full-fledged democracy, you don't expect that to happen. It was a first great effort where all the free citizens, meaning males of Athens, would always come together for important things, to make important decisions. And they would come together to watch these plays, to sort of see how their great poets were interpreting life for them and giving them, continuing to help them understand life. So the women, of course, were not even considered equal to the men in any way, really. There were some great women like Athene and things, and some heroes in the Greek culture, but womanhood and manhood and malehood, no, there was no equality. He was the greatest of men. He was really concerned for us. He saved us before from the Sphinx, and now we're under a great plague. This is some years after he has become ruler. All right, and they come to him, and the words that Sophocles has the people put and speak about him is what's very important. This is a model for a democratic ruler. All right, he's loved by his people. He's only concerned for them. Notice how Sophocles has him speak. But he wants to know how he can save the polis from this great plague that is destroying everything there. When the people come and ask him to make a decision which he thinks is going to cost him his life, he tells them, well, if this is what you want, then I will do it, but it's going to cost me my life. This is the model of a democratic ruler. So try to keep some of these items in your mind as you read this. For one way of interpreting the play, you're free to interpret any way you like, but the way I am offering it to you is that I think he is being presented as the hero of the polis and the hero of Apollo, the god Apollo, because the god Apollo came to represent two injunctions, two commandments, if you want to call them. This is how you should live your life in the broadest way, according to these two great sayings. Know thyself, meaning seek to know who you are all through life. Don't just accept your identity as if it's something given. Be constantly seeking to know better and better who you are. Seek to know your identity, in the fullest possible way, and do it. And balance is best means balance. Balance is the most difficult thing to achieve for the Greek. Balance doesn't mean work to get a 70, don't get a 50, but don't worry about a 90, No, to translate it very simply into that kind of language, the 90 is the balance. Just like courage is the balance, you'll see later on when you get to philosophy about this. Courage is the balance between cowardice and stupidity, being rashful or being a coward. Courage is the balance, and it's much more difficult. It's easier to be rash, it's easier to be a coward, but to be a courageous human, that's the best. So these two things, live your life trying always to do your best in whatever it is you're doing, seeking more and more dynamically to know, don't just accept what people tell you you are. Seek to find out who you are. Odysseus refused to just listen to Athene. He wanted to investigate. Right? We will see Socrates doesn't just listen to Apollo when he's told he's the wisest man. He wants to go and investigate. This notion is a very, very important one in the Greek consciousness. So he is primarily, therefore, the god of a hero of Apollo, because the whole play can be understood in this way. What is Oedipus doing? He is seeking to know his own identity. He's being told, first he was told he's going to kill his father, marry his mother. Then he's being told all kinds of other things. And now he's being told that he is the one who is the source of all the trouble in the city, all right? But he continues to search for, and people then tell him, stop the search because the search is going to lead to your misery. Tiresias tells him this. His wife tells him this. Many people tell him this all through. This is like Gilgamesh. Everybody tells him, stop seeking more, just give up, And had he given up, he'd never brought back all the wonderful things he brings back to Uruk. He never helped society. He never helped humanity. All right, so you need to see these critical things which aren't teach you to be critical. Don't just look at something surface-wise. Look for the puzzles, the enigmas in each text you read. In Achilles, why does Homer have him do that? It's because he then wants to stress that heroism is costly, and Odysseus is ready to pay the price even when he knows how much it's going to cost him. These are the things you really want to be able to see through the surface of what you read of these plays. But he's seeking to know who he is at the cost of his life, seeking excellence in who he is at a high price. This is heroism, and without heroism there's nothing called tragic, you see. That's why I'm focusing on this. This is a culture that believed the only thing you have worthwhile in life is to be a somebody, is to do something, is to make something of your life. And to do so, you have to live life at a high level, seeking excellence, not just seeking the mediocre, getting along, eat, drink, and be merry, as in Gilgamesh Siduri's advice, which he rejects, and that's what makes him great. The human ideal, an active search for identity and place within the cosmos. So identity here doesn't mean, meditate on your navel or something like that. It means objectively learn more and more about how the cosmos works, and doesn't matter. And what is your true place there? What are your limitations, particularly? That's what he's learning. He's learning his limitation. And what is the limitation he's learning? He's learning the limitation that the tragic poets wanted to tell the rationalist philosophers at the same time they were debating with each other in Athens. That your rationalism is wonderful, but it has severe limits. You can never really know what's going on, because the world is tragic. You believe the world is rationalistic. The tragic is telling you, I believe we as humans are rational and rationalistic, but the world we live in is not rationalistic. And therefore, because of this gap, life can be tragic. We can do our best, do the most rational thing, seek to know, do everything we can, and then not be rewarded. So he is seeking to know himself in the best possible way, resisting the temptation to give up the search. If he gives up the search, the polis will stay under the plague. So don't forget that item in the work here. And then balance his best, his role. What's his duty? What's his responsibility? And this is a great man, the way Sophocles is presenting him. At the end, after it's found out he's the murderer, he has killed his father, he has married his mother unknowingly, and they say, what God made you do this? Because they always respect him. It's always lamentation. They never condemn him. He's a great man. He's a model. How could this happen to such a great man? And if this happens to you, what can I say is going to happen to me? This is what Sophocles is presenting in this work. But he said, what Oedipus says, yes, Apollo, I'm not a god myself, but it was my own hand that did it. So he took responsibility. And this is doing, balance is best means to take responsibility. He is the king. He is the leader of the polis. Therefore, everything he does is for the sake of the polis. He's doing it at its best, which means it's going to cost him. It means he's risking his life. So he is the model of the god Apollo. Know thyself and balance is best. And presenting the conclusion about our human life, or the vision of our human life, that the tragic view, that basically don't expect happiness. No promises made, no promises broken. Why? Whoever made a promise to you that if you do the best thing, you're going to be rewarded? Don't live for reward and punishment. Animals live for reward and punishment. We're animals, so we live for reward and punishment, but we're a special kind of animal who can actually go against our self-interest in order to do something valuable, to give ourselves immortality of name, to give ourselves dignity, and to help humanity, like Prometheus did in that image. So these three major aspects, if you keep them in mind as you do the reading of the play, try to see to give you some examples, when he brings in, he does his best as a ruler to find out why is Thebes, the city he's ruling now, why is it under a plague? And everything is, all of humanity has come to a stop. And what's the reason? Well, Apollo gives the reason. It's because a king was assassinated and he wasn't avenged. Ugliness, disorder, no beauty, all right? He's gone against, Cyclops went against the law of hospitality, and so he was punished, all right? Now, this man has killed his father and married his mother, so it has to be, there has to be a nemesis, there has to be the retribution. But the human interest in it is to send the message that I think was already there in Homer, that basically a tragic view of life tells you don't live for reward and punishment. If it comes, if reward comes, that's wonderful. But generally, don't be surprised when you're probably going to get more evil than good. Zeus says in the Odyssey, Zeus gives more evil than good. So these are not just sort of interpretations coming from outside. If you read the Greek corpus of of Homer, and then you go read this material coming out of that, this the perspective I'm trying to give you on reading this particular play will make more and more sense for you, because you can interpret this play in many, many ways. But this particular way, I think, will help you get more into sort of let the people speak for themselves, let Sophocles speak for himself. There's only one place where he speaks about pride and tyranny, and it does not apply to Oedipus. There's one place where he talks, where the chorus is musing about many things and speaking about pride and tyranny and all this. But Sophocles never allows Oedipus to do anything that would come to our minds as pride and tyranny. He's the exact opposite. The only pride he has is in the arrogance of thinking he's a human reason, can unpack the mystery of the universe, and therefore can go against something that has already, that's a part of the system, that he can forge his way through the given system to find happiness and fulfillment and all this. You can't do that. That's his arrogance. That's the only arrogance that comes in the Greek sense now, because all other senses of pride and tyranny are usually imported from somewhere else. The arrogance of not respecting your limit, not doing what you're doing, being unyielding in Homer, that's the pride. When you're not ready to give and take. He gives and takes all the time. He makes the wrong conclusions. He has limited insight, so he makes errors of judgment. All right? This is his major problem. His major problem is the human problem, and that's the message of the thing. This is not a story about Oedipus. This is a story about you and me from this perspective. And you'll be introduced to many perspectives, so you can make up your mind what you want to get from each of these. But the tragic perspective is a very serious one that lives on through the centuries in different forms and different ways. And the basic notion is this: live life for you to be a somebody in the terms of Odysseus. Do something excellent. Be authentic. Live up to your own ideals. Create your own values, but live up to them. Be responsible. Don't, practice what you preach. Don't just sort of, be popular and famous and all this. Live for humanity. Live for dignity. Live for humanity, and don't expect reward. If reward comes, that's fine. If it doesn't, no promises made, no promises broken. In the minutes I have, I don't know what I can do of usefulness. I have 10 more minutes. I didn't realize I'd go this quickly. There's nothing up there anymore. Can you connect it for me again? I'm sorry. Maybe I can help you a little bit with the sheets here. That if you take a look at these sheets, primarily it gives you more of what I've been trying to say in this quick way, and hopefully your teachers can or may not want to use them, but there are a lot of things there that they could use to help you understand more what I've been trying to say, and of course disagree with what I'm saying. That's always a very good instigation to make you think for yourself. But when you come to, after everything has been, when you come to page 3, at the very bottom, unfortunately, it didn't fit on the top of the page without making a fifth page of the next one. It really belongs, the conclusion. What's human life all about in this tragic, so-called tragic perspective? I then try to, thank you. No, I don't need that. Try to summarize for you in those bullet points at the end of, I think there are 4. Okay, so look through those, look up some of the texts you're given there as references, all through anyway, and see what you can make of it and see what you think of it. In the time I have, actually, I think it might be useful to go through this section at the end on the fly sheet now. Further reflections on the tragic. Maybe some of these things will also be interesting to you. Tragic is often compared to comic, but something you need to know that comic, philosophically, literarily, artistically, in opera, whatever, the way comic is used is not in the way we normally understand it, ha ha ha. In comedy, you have farce, but you also have very high comedy, even in the genre of theater. So comic, however, as a philosophy of life, as opposed to tragic as a philosophy of life. Remember, philosophy here means the search for wisdom, not professional philosophy in an academic unit. But the search for wisdom about life, if finally you think of it under the rubric of tragic, okay, then you try to see what I've been trying to say. Comic would say, no, that in spite of all these difficult things you find in life, actually, finally things turn out in a positive way. There is hope. It's much more hopeful. There's hope in comedy. Very difficult times sometimes, very difficult things in some things that are called comedy. But finally, we can do something about the way the thing is. There's no fixed inevitability of the cosmic structure that's operating. In tragedy, there's no hope, but there's no despair. That's very important for you to see that. It's not either or. There's no hope, but there's no despair. There's a whole different approach to life. It's a life that seeks dignity, and not a life that seeks happiness. All right? Nietzsche, if ever you come to him, made fun of the people, the utilitarians and the Epicureans and all this, who was looking for happiness. Life is about finding something serious, about finding something of value, finding an Uberman, finding something more than what you have right now, and expect to suffer, because if you don't suffer, you'll never find something that's really worthwhile. So dignity is another approach to human life through tragedy. Seek dignity, seek grandeur, seek something important, seek to do something authentic, something that'll make a difference in life. Through suffering, insight was actually the slogan of the tragedians. Insight. That's what you want. We want good sight. That's why I have glasses on me. But I want insight. I want more and more for my mind sight, my human sight to grow. Insight. You want that to grow, thought the tragedians. Learn from what we're telling you in Oedipus. Insight comes only through suffering. If you think suffering is your main enemy, this is the point you want to think about. Is pain your main enemy, as in hedonism, Epicureanism, utilitarianism, and most of us live that way all the time, even if we think we have another ideology. We're like animals, we're animals, so we seek to avoid pain, we seek to see what gives us pleasure, and then we do it in more and more sophisticated ways because we're a sophisticated animal, all right? But basically, the whole notion of who we are as a human being, suffering takes a very important role for these people. If you just want to avoid suffering, avoid it, of course, but you can never avoid it all. But try to see whether the suffering is that you're trying to avoid is going to also have you avoid insight, avoid a growth in wisdom. This is the story of Gilgamesh. Had he wanted to avoid the suffering, he would never had the insight, even of the insight of that story, that there is no permanence, that there is no immortality. That's the wisdom. But he got it in a way that made of him a great man and allowed him to bring back so much wonderful things for humanity. It's never simple, the tragic view or perspective on life. Tragic, man is not free or determined, as if a human being could be either or. We are always a function of both. Things that do determine us, limitation in the Greek sense, in many ways, but we're also free. And free isn't sort of a philosophical debate. Free is our humanity. We make decisions. We make decisions that we know instinctively, as well as any instinct, that we need to take responsibility for them. We cannot ignore this with some kind of philosophical fancy argument that it's all our genomes and we're just slaves of our genes, and now the cognitive science is going to tell us exactly why we do everything at whatever moment. That's wonderful, if you like to live in the world of dreams. But if you live in the real world of the existential life, then this is what great literature, in one way or another, and great religion and great philosophy, tell you: know your limitations, but also know what your responsibility and your role. Tragic choice. There's no. Usually, we don't have a win-win option. Usually, we have a win-lose option. And so, this tragic choice. We have to make a tragic choice. Achilles had to choose between being a nobody but living a nice, comfortable, successful life, or being a somebody and dying young. You see, both of them are losers, because he doesn't want to be mediocre. That's not an option. There's no good option. He had to choose between two bad options, and he chose the better of the two. The context is extremely important, and this will become more important when you come to Plato's Republic also, because they were all being influenced by the civil war that was going on around them. And because of the Civil War and the ravages of the Civil War, and I'm sure you can all appreciate how it might have been, even if you don't read the Thucydides, you got two major responses. The rationalistic philosophers, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and you'll see in Plato, the attempt rationally and through philosophy to find a way out and towards justice and towards improving society. The tragedians were in the same thing, saying, we must use our reason, that's all we have, do that, but don't expect success. Do it anyway, for whatever it will give you, but don't ever think we can really reach anything serious. In a sense, war is our natural condition, as Thucydides comes to in the history of where human nature being what it is, where life is just going to go on being what it is. So the tragic view and the philosophical rationalistic view came out of the actual context of the Peloponnesian War. So we are left with this thing. In the 21st century, we have a lot of history now, and literature, and history of ideas, and art, and all that. Poetic insight, rationalistic analysis. You are usually funneled into rationalistic analysis, what that usually leads you into. And you're tending to more and more be brainwashed into thinking that's what human life is all about. The more you can develop this, the more human you will be. Poetic insight is the other side of your humanity, which is to remind you, no matter how clever you become rationalistically and scientifically, you're always going to look primitive to the coming centuries. Whereas poetic insight sort of cuts through chronology and time and touches the depths of what we call our humanity, the main things that humans at the time of Gilgamesh and today still look for in life. So we have two avenues and two channels into truth and into wisdom as philosophers. We are all philosophers, meaning we all hopefully are seeking wisdom and seeking truth about human life as philosophers. But we can get our philosophical conclusions rationalistically through the ways we do in departments and things like this. Or we can also continue to be open to the whole world of literature and poetry and religion and spirituality and all the other aspects of human life that give us insight. And this is perhaps something for you all to think about. Thank you, and I hope your teachers don't have too much trouble.